Welcome to the Astro Lounge, a podcast that invites you to unwind, have a little fun, and engage in meaningful conversations with others in the astro community and beyond.
We're some astro babes turned astro besties who met at Astrology University. We believe in astrology that works with you and that your chart is completely special and unique. In this pod, we're going to have some fun with astro through games, discussions, special guests, and even more.
Hi, I'm Simona, a travel consultant turned astrologer. I now help people journey inward, serving as a guide towards deeper self-discovery, agency, and a more meaningful, wonder-filled life.
Hiya, I'm Kaia, an astrologer weaving the threads of my three passions together: theater, astrology, and witchcraft, all for the hopes of digging into these little cosmic winks for some doses of self-love and self-acceptance.
So sit back, relax, grab a cozy beverage,
and let's get cosmic in this Astro Lounge. Hello.
Hello, Kaia. How are you? How are you
good.
On this new moon in Taurus?
Oh my goodness. I love a new moon. I love a new moon in Taurus.
I love a new moon.
New moon. That was just too really, I was embodying the spirit of Taurus, the cow energy, moo, I guess.
I love it. I love that we are recording pretty much right after it was the exact new moon, which is pretty cool right now. It is May 16th at 1:46 p.m. And we are going to do our podcast today on aspects.
Yes. I'm so excited because aspects it's where we really dig into some of the material of the chart. And I think that really helps explain people's why people's charts are so unique and complex and contradictory, but then also full of similar weaving threads. Oh, okay.
Ooh.
What?
I love aspects. I love aspects because we get to really get into the relationship between the planets.
Yeah.
I mean, we first understand the archetypes of the planets are first and foremost, but to kind of see how they're dancing in the sky together, what their relationship is with each other brings the whole chart to life. So I'm really excited about today's talk.
I know, me too. But how's the new moon in Taurus for you? I didn't ask. Remind me, where is it lighting up for you?
The new moon in Taurus is in my 7th house of relationships. And I'm actually feeling more, I don't know, I've been having a bit of a difficult couple of weeks, but today I feel a little bit of levity and I feel a little bit more at peace. So that feels very much in line with Taurus. I feel, I don't necessarily feel more grounded because I think that Uranus in Gemini is still quite, it's going to be for a long time, but it's really affecting me in that way. But I do feel a sense of, I don't know, I keep saying peace and I feel better, a little bit more settled in that way. So, yeah.
It's interesting, right? Because it's there are these regular rhythms of new moons, full moons, and they're always there. And they're also the sun seasons, right? That kind of help to color the background. And sometimes I feel like you can really feel into the sun season. But then when there are big planetary shifts going on, Uranus and Gemini, for example, I was just kind of thinking about that too. We're in Taurus season. I've got a Taurus sun. There's this Taurus new moon right now. And it's a little tricky right now to kind of feel into because I feel, and especially Uranus and Gemini is just shaking up a lot of things. It's definitely, there's a frenetic kind of frazzled energy, not necessarily bad. It's just, it's different. It's new. It shifted out of Taurus. It's in Gemini. That's a complete shift. So I don't know. I've been finding it kind of hard to access that Taurus stuff, but I'm really happy to hear that even if it's not necessarily groundedness, you're there's maybe a little bit more of that Taurian, I don't know, peace or maybe ease or something.
Yes, I feel that, and I know it's just there's something, there's a nuance there that I feel. But to your point, when there's these huge planetary shifts or dynamics, and it's not just Uranus, Gemini, we've got a lot of dynamism with air and fire overall. So it makes sense. It's hard to, like you said, it's going to be a little bit more of a subtle quality maybe when these are
Yeah.
larger planetary influences are at play. But
Yeah.
in any case, we'll see how the podcast goes. I'm feeling
I
really
know.
very happy to be here. I'm always happy to be here with you,
Me
but
too.
there's something like sometimes I'm more nervous. Other times,
Yeah.
I'm a little, every time I feel a little bit different when I come on, but I'm just really looking forward to this conversation.
Well, and I think we did embody some new moon and Taurus energy. We took our time, and we made sure to catch up because life has been
Yes.
lifing, and it was nice to be able to just like talk to one another a bit before we had record. And so I think maybe in a way we did kind of harness that. Yours is in the 7th, mine's in the 8th, so both those houses are about like partnerships, and those exchange of energy. So it's kind of, I think we got that little boost there, which is nice.
That's a beautiful observation. That's right, because we always have a little chit chat before
Yeah.
we hit the record button, but we had a nice conversation, kind of sat in with it, like just took our time with it, really enjoyed it. So
did.
great observation.
Oh,
And it was right. We at 1 o'clock when it was the new moon, right? And that's,
yeah.
so yeah, we are embodying it to that level for sure.
I think you even said you're like, oh, let's take our time. I'm in no rush.
I did say that. I
That's so
love it.
funny.
Sometimes that's what's so great about the archetypes is we live them and sometimes
Yeah.
we're not even aware to what degree.
Oh,
Like you have to kind of reflect on, oh yeah, sometimes
totally.
it's obvious, but other
Yes.
times it's just like, oh yeah, we are embodying it all the time.
Right. And then just to note, if you're watching on videos, I have these curlers in. So it's not a new hairstyle. I'm just trying to get my hair curly for tonight. So if you're like, what do you have in your hair? And they're really fun because they're you like wrap them around. These ones are called octopus.
I love it. I love it. Well,
I
you have
got
such
hair.
great, beautiful hair, so you can do all these great styles. I have like three strands of hair, so I'm more limited. So I love all the different things you do with your hair. It's really
Thank
beautiful.
you. That's very sweet. I just wanted to name it because I wore this a couple times. I've worn it to work, and people are like, "Oh, is this a hair?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm curling hair."
I'm in process.
I'm in process. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes. Awesome. So yes, I guess that's enough about my hair curlers, but
Never enough. Never enough.
never enough.
Let's go ahead and maybe get started on our main topic of the day, which again is aspects. So should, give a little bit of, I kind of hinted towards what aspects are. They're planetary relationships. And they're calculating, the degrees, like how far they are from each other and that kind of thing. But we're going to try to simplify it and kind of explain it in an accessible way. And what do you think, Kaia? Maybe do a little bit of an overview of just kind of name the aspects and give a little tidbit about them. And then we're going to go a little through each major aspect and we'll explain what that means as well. And give a couple examples we decided we're going to give examples using the Moon and Saturn, as well as Sun, Jupiter, because they're very different qualities, but just to see how that can flavor the aspects.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. Yeah, and we'll talk about aspects and kind of like what those are. And then as you said, there are a couple of major aspects. We'll give a little bit notes about that and then talk about those archetypal realms of the two aspects we picked for today. And what I'm really excited about is that this is going to be another one of our series. So, we have some thoughts about, we'll probably do a series on the houses. We're doing, we did one episode on the sun, so we're definitely going to go through the planets. And this is what I love about astrology. There's just so much to explore and to mine there. And so this is the beginning of a whole new series. So it'll be really exciting there are so many aspects, so we're not going to run out of any really thing to talk about. And so we'll typically pick at least two aspects, and maybe they're contrasting or they're just kind of different to kind of get into the vibe of them, because at least one of these at some point you're going to have in your chart. So we're hoping this also gives you some information about it as well. And I was kind of thinking, like, is this episode one of those that's a little bit more intermediate or beginner? Maybe intermediate, because aspects we met in year 2 at Astrology University. However, aspects are such a fundamental piece of astrology that I think even if you're just starting out or you're a little interested, it's still worth it to kind of listen, because even if you're not quite at aspects yet, it's just kind of good for your ear and your brain to hear archetypal stuff being worked out. Because in this episode, I think we're also going to show you how you kind of start to blend planetary energies together. And what does that actually look like? So, this episode, we're not just talking about like a planet and a sign, but we're talking about two planets in signs in conversation with one another. So I just kind of wanted to flag that.
Beautifully said. I love that you had that introduction there, because there's actually branches of astrology that don't really that use the signs as secondary. Like we
Yeah.
mentioned that we practice an archetypal astrology, but we also, there's actually archetypal astrology. Sometimes they don't even bring in the signs, or they do bring in the
Yeah.
signs, but it's secondary. We definitely
Yeah.
work with the signs as well, but the idea is that the aspects are first and foremost. So how are the planets relating to each other, and then the signs color the expression, but that archetypal energy, the energy of the planets, are so key. So you can mine a lot, you can get a lot with just kind of feeling into how they're relating with each other, and how these dynamics are at play within us, and how sometimes we project them out. It's just such a rich topic, and I'm like, can't wait to get into it. It's one of my favorites. I always say that's one of my favorites, but
It's one of my favorites.
I love a lot that has to do with astrology.
Yeah. So as Simona was kind of alluding to, aspects are conversations between planets in the chart, and they're the geometrical alignments. So the degrees apart between them give us information about what the vibe of that conversation is. And I like to say conversation because it really does feel like it's a conversation, because even aspects aside, we know we all have different parts of our psyche, working at all times, and you can feel like there's parts of you that are sometimes at odds, or that really get each other, or for some reason only come alive when you're at work or with friends or whatever. And so that kind of helps me get into aspect land, because maybe aspects are linking what your Venus and your Mars, and your Venus and your Mars are both governing these two different archetypal realms. And if they're in relationship in your chart by these geometrical alignments, this gives us a little bit of information of what they're chatting about. Is there a little bit of friction? Is there some harmony to play with? Are they understanding each other? Stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, while all the planets in our chart are in some way dancing together, they're all part of us, right? It is those specific relationships that are going to be highlighted in our life.
Yeah.
And I love what you said. Sometimes certain things come out more at work, or more in this area of life or that area of life, of course, based on the houses. But certain relationships are going to bring out parts of ourselves that maybe we haven't fully owned yet, or that for whatever reason, but they're still part of us. And so when we see ourselves maybe in certain patterns of relationships, or why does this keep coming up? Why do I feel like, that's something that resides within us as well. And so to kind of recognize that can be really powerful. So in any case.
Oh my God, sorry. You're a genius. And so whenever you say things, my brain.
Oh, I was mirroring you. I was going off of what you were saying. So 'tis you, the genius, Kaia.
Please, we are geniuses. No, but something you said sparked something in me, because, for example, it gives us more information. I keep saying that, I know. But let's say someone has a sun in Cancer, but they really don't feel like I don't know, there's a misunderstanding. There's something there that's like blocking or hindering something, some understanding of the archetypal realm. And then they go to an astrologer, and the astrologer sees all these aspects talking to the sun. And that might give it a little bit of, you know what I mean? Like a little bit of information about how to work with that sun in Cancer. And then maybe that person was like, oh, I have a completely different understanding of the sun in Cancer, because there's also all this other stuff just chatting to the sun principle in my chart. So I hope that makes sense. But do you see what I'm getting at, like a little bit there?
It was perfectly. No, I love how you said that. And I think that's a beautiful framework to get started. And I think as we start moving through this everything's kind of like a process, the way we do things. We start moving through it. I think for those that might be a little bit newer to aspects, it'll start to make sense. So beautifully said. What do you think? Should we go ahead and just kind of name, first of all, we said we're going to discuss the major aspects. Now, in astrology, there's a differentiation between what are quote unquote major aspects, which go way back, right? That are kind of the ones that are considered to be stronger, louder. Now there's some of course, like anything in the astrological community, there are conversations about that. And some people, for example, Rick Levine makes a case for the quote unquote minor aspects, which he's tried to coin a new name, like metaphysical aspects. He has different ways of thinking about it, but he makes a case that they're just as important. They have things to say. So of course, like anything, we are going to speak to what is traditionally known as the major aspects plus the quincunx, right? But I want the audience, whoever's listening, to kind of draw their own conclusions. There's a whole body of work out there. You guys can go and do your own research and think about it, because there are these other aspects that are also have a part to play in our life. So, just take this for what it is, but I just wanted to name it, that there are other aspects out there that we're not going to be talking about, but that also have a place in astrology and that are important.
Exactly. Yes. We're going to really hone in on the main players that you usually hear about, while still holding space for the minor ones that give a lot of extra information. But I think I like what we're doing today, because I think you kind of first got to go there, and then digging into the other aspects later on, that it's kind of helpful to get these under your belt. So they're kind of like a good foundational touchstones. Absolutely.
Yeah, the traditional, right? We're adding again, we're going to speak also to one aspect that was not so much used in traditional astrology, but I think that it is a very important one. At least it's something that, for me, I'm very drawn to this aspect to talk about it. I'm intrigued by it. Yes. So, but in any case, so why don't we just kind of name the ones that we're going to talk about, and then we can dive in a little deeper.
Right. Yeah, today, just to name them all, we're just going to do a little brief treatment on the conjunction, the opposition, the trine, the square, the sextile, the quincunx.
Yes. And so why don't we start where a good place to start is the conjunction, which just a tiny introduction here. We'll just start by saying it is when planets are really, really, really close to each other, like a new moon with the sun and the moon. They're together. And of course, there's this like, how close do they need to be? There's a lot of talk about that too in the astrological community. And when, just a little technical term, when we're discussing how far away by degree, it's called an orb. And so, some astrologers for conjunctions will use up to a 10-degree orb. Some will use a 5-degree. It all depends. But for, when you're just getting started, we suggest looking at things within about a 5-degree orb, within 5 degrees apart in either direction, just as a place to start. But then depending on who you are, you might be more in touch with certain things in your chart. You might be more sensitive to things that are further away. So there's a lot of nuance here, but I just wanted to name that.
Yeah. Yeah. Orbs are definitely an interesting topic, and there's so many differences of opinion. Again, I think that's a good starting off point. And then, like, I have gone a little, because I'm like, whatever. I sometimes go a little bit bigger and generous with orbs. But again, at the end of the day, it is really to see like what you feel in relationship to your chart. And it's something you get to kind of choose how you use it to the orbs. But I like the 5 to maybe 8 degrees, but 5 is pretty good, especially with the conjunction. Yeah.
Yes. Well, what I do want to name that in traditional astrology, they used to, and they still do, look at a conjunction if it's, or they call it co-present too. So I think there's still some nuance within that, but the idea if it's in the same sign. They're conjunct, right? Conjoined. But now I think even in traditional, they may not always call it a conjunction, but co-present, because there's this idea if 2 planets are in the same sign, they're still on the same quote unquote team in a way. So, but and again, you're going to hear different things out there. So we're just trying to name them for the purpose of this exercise. We're taking into consideration the degrees apart, because then we can add a whole other layer. What if there are 2 signs that are different? One's at the end of one, one's at the beginning. Do you use that? I say yes, but there's a whole school of thought there. So, but we're just going to kind of keep it a little simple now, and just let's imagine they're the same sign and they're within about 8 degrees from each other.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Yeah. So, for example, let's say your moon is at, I'm really great at math. Your moon is at 3 degrees and your Saturn is at 8.
Beautiful. Of the same sign.
Wow. Yes. Good job.
Good job.
That could be a conjunction.
Yes,
Even
that
more,
would be
it could be right. It'd be even tighter if it was like 3 and 4, 3 and 2, whatever.
yes.
Yeah,
Yes. And so the conjunction, they're together basically. And
yeah,
the idea is this concept of one. You're talking about dividing up in the circle, right? If you have the principle of unity, it's one. And so we have the planets together operating as a unit. And there's different ways to think about it. Some people like to, sometimes I think of colors blending together. But
yeah,
depending on how far away they are from each other, some people like to think of it as a three-legged race where you're always kind of when one planet is activated, the other one is as well. They're working
yeah.
together, right? Or they're together working. How well they're working together is another
Totally.
story. But they're together. They're activated together, and so there's different ways to feel into it. But it's also can be challenging to suss out those energies because let's say we have Venus and Mars really tightly together. They can feel like they're different Venus and Mars are different parts of the psyche, but when they're
Yeah.
so tight, it can be hard to separate. So it's also known as a hard aspect. And that
Hmm.
means, you know, that there can be some challenges, not that it's bad or good.
Yeah.
We want to get that is definitely not what we want this to be like easy, soft aspects are easy, no.
Yeah.
But they can be a little bit challenging in terms of, how we feel when they're activated, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. Our
Yeah. I think
experience of them.
exactly. And I think the challenge is in differentiating who's talking. Like a lot of people
Yes.
describe it as like too many cooks in the kitchen sometimes.
Yes.
And you're like, like let's say you have, I don't know, you have Mercury and Mars and Saturn all in Aries. You're like, oh my God, but this is all Aries energy, but these are all different planetary functions.
Yes.
This is my Mars, this is my whatever I said, like they're all trying to talk. And
They're
so
vying for attention.
they're vying for attention. And this can be an incredibly powerful, potent aspect. Some astrologers are like, it's the strongest, most potent because things can really fuse together. And that can, in all kinds of different ways. So yes, like when they can operate together, that's awesome because it's like you're joined by the same arm. You guys have the same kind of understanding. But sometimes the tricky part, as we're saying, is getting to hear who's talking. Who do I need to pull in more? Who's taking up too much space?
Right. I love thinking of it as like a team or like everybody's on the same team, right? We've
Yeah.
got Team Cancer, Team Libra. But, Mars's approach to how this should go is going to be different
Yeah.
than Venus's approach. Then and
Very.
they might all have that same kind of Cancerian or Aries objective, but the way the energy moves
Exactly.
through is going to be different. So, I like to think
Yeah.
of that. Every people on a team aren't all the same,
Now, okay. I feel like that was a pretty good treatment of kind of like the conjunction, how that can feel. So I'm thinking we go to the next aspect in this process.
Yes. And
Okay.
so the next major aspect is the sextile. So now we're moving to about 60 degrees
Mhm.
apart from each other. So, of course, we can say maybe 55, well, yeah, about 55 to 65. Let's just,
Yeah.
for the purpose of this exercise. Now, the sextile is said to be a more quote unquote harmonious aspect. And so, in one of our recent episodes, we talked about the lunar phases and how they correspond with the plant cycle and this kind of growth process, right? This kind of cyclical process of everything, of life. And so, you think of the conjunction being like that new moon energy. It's
Yeah.
like new, and there's this, everything is kind of starting off, right? There's that idea. But by the sextile, when you move into this, now you're starting to emerge. You're starting to emerge, and there's a sense of possibility, and it's kind of fun. Things are still new, but the seed is pushing through the ground, right? And so there's that sense of it's time to develop new skills and talents, and it's kind of exciting because it's new. It's not necessarily we'll get to the trine, which is a little bit more just kind of like things are just flowing. You have to work the sextile. It has to,
Yeah.
you have to have some effort. I think one word that I was rereading some of this material, because I always like to do that, right, was coaxing. So there's a coaxing aspect. So when planets are in sextile to each other, there's it's an asset that you can really mine. And once you start working it, it can come naturally. It can feel like easeful, but you do have to work it. And
Yeah.
one of my favorite descriptions of the sextile was from Jason Hawley. And he mentioned it, there's that flirty energy. And I love that because if you think about flirting and like a new relationship, like, hey, you have to like then follow up if you want to continue seeing this person, right? You have to put some effort in it. It might be a little bit exciting and a little bit you're kind of nervous, but you work it and there's a connection, right? And if we think of it in terms of signs, specifically the sextile, let's, for example, Aries and Gemini, right, would be a sex. So they share, they're both yang. So they have that quality that's the same, and they're compatible elements. So fire and air. So they're elements usually, unless I don't want to confuse people. We're using out of sign, aspects. But right now we're just going to stay in sign to keep this smooth.
Yeah.
So they share this kind of, they go well together, even though they're different. Unlike the trine where it's like the same element. The sextile, we're usually talking about signs that are in different elements, but they go like fire and air. Air fuels fire, But of course, we could see how that could go awry as well. So that's just a little introduction on the sextile.
Sexy sextiles.
Yeah, sexy sextiles.
I love sextiles.
I do too.
I really do. They don't. It's interesting. It's like they don't always get attention, but then I feel like everybody's like, we should give sextiles more attention. So I think they're well loved and they feel very like winky and flirty. But yeah, and I think something also I'm remembering too is like you do have to put work into it to really get it going, and it typically, not always, but typically can be work that like you enjoy. Like, oh, I kind of like that I'm having like the podcast, for example. I would say like I'm not like, oh fuck, but like once I start prepping and like we're doing stuff, I'm like, oh, this is stimulating, and it's like very stimulating energy. It's like a fun little like a spark, and there can be a lot of like harmony and aptitudes here, and we're putting a little oomph into it, and I really like that you brought it into the terms of the planetary cycle too with the moons. It's such a good way to look at all this stuff in astrology, because it is like like at new moon you get those like visions and ideas you want to seed, and then now at the sextile at that time of the cycle, it's like I could keep doing this or I could kind of let it go. So I don't know. I just really love sextiles.
I love that you mentioned the podcast because it totally is that. It's a great example because it's not like we have to put effort into this. It's not just happening, right? And I do every time get a little bit nervous when I go, I'm like, oh, you're activated. It's so much fun. I love doing it and it's something I enjoy. So that's such a great example. But if we just like, it's not like it's second nature that it's just, happening like that. So it was such a great example. And I was also thinking, now it slipped my mind. There was something else that you said with the sextile, but now it slipped my mind. Oh, I was thinking, yes, if we're going through kind of like the stage of the cycle and it's kind of relatively new, I'm thinking like, let's say you're learning a new skill and you start to get the hang of it. You're like, this is fun and I'm actually kind of good at this, right? Yeah. And it's, you still have to keep working. You're new, right? It's like, but you realize I'm developing a skill here. I'm developing a talent. It's really, really fun. Like, my husband's really great at chess and he's been taking lessons and he's like always like it's still work. He has to like put in the hours and to learn and the studies, but he loves it. It's really stimulating. And so you could say that I just like to throw my husband in all the time. As a Libra, I'm always talking about, my partnership. But, that's just an example that came to mind.
Yeah, I love a sextile. That's a great example too, because again, it's like a fun thing that he's putting work into, but maybe like sometimes I feel like sextiles can then really come into importance and come into play in your life, but you don't always necessarily like see how. And sometimes they're just there too, and you're like, oh, let me give this a little wink. A little wink is how I feel.
Wink, listen, yeah. Like I'm already feeling like as we're talking about the sextile, like I'm feeling a little hey, flirty, light.
Party.
Yeah, let's party. Yeah, exactly. So that's a little bit on the sextile. Now, again, we will move on, but just to keep in mind, of course, if we have heavier planets like Pluto and Saturn, it may not be as flirty, but there's still talents to mine. So just something to keep in mind because it's always first and foremost the planetary archetypes.
That's great. And because they're in different elements, typically, at least the way we're doing it today, as you said, even if they're a little bit more substantial planets, and we'll get to this with the trines and sextiles, sometimes that can suggest, and that's why they're called like easier aspects, which we don't really use, is because sometimes there can be more of an inherent harmony or a little bit more ease to get things going. Whereas with the other aspects, as you'll see, it might be a little bit more challenging or take an extra different kind of work. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Perfect.
Cool.
Beautiful.
And which takes us
Which takes us to the less flirty aspect of the square.
God, a chart is full of these.
I love it. That's why you get a lot done, right?
Sure.
Well, this is a very dynamic aspect. And on a technical level, now we're moving to around 90 degrees. So let's think 85 to 95 degrees. This is the planetary relationship, right? And we're at the quarter. Now we can think of like when we think of the lunar phase, right? It's at the quarter mark, right? It's in between new moon and full moon. And so it's very dynamic, and it is an aspect that we like to think of like creative tension, because now the elements and the signs are kind of at appear seemingly at cross purposes. Because let's take, for example, Aries and Cancer. Now they're both cardinals, so they do share the cardinality, but it's a different element, and they're not necessarily quote unquote compatible. I hate, that word feels a little flat, because you can work together, but just if we just think of, water and fire, and the idea of water puts fire out, just in a very basic way, as an initial way to think of it. So there's this dynamic tension, but there's kind of a call to do something with it. Now, where it can be tricky, sometimes the tension is very great, and it's how we consciously work with it. It's going to create this kind of sense of friction where we're going to want to move the energy. Now, some people, sometimes it's so much friction, you kind of freeze, but eventually it's asking for something. Now, what that something is and how we work with it and the outcome of it is all, part of how conscious we are and how we're working with it. But when it's working well and constructively, people can do some really creative things, taking these different energies and mixing them together and creating something new, building something with it, breaking through. So it's a really, while it can feel challenging and stimulating, it can be a really positive aspect in one's life. And in fact, sometimes a lot of astrologers say it's necessary to have some of these quote unquote harder aspects in the chart, because it stimulates, it's motivating. Whereas sometimes some of the ones that come more naturally, we might take for granted, as we'll talk about in the trine.
Yeah. Kind of nodding. I'm like, yep. So, excuse me, sorry. I also was born I have a first quarter moon phase. So, so I'm very familiar.
You can relate to this at a soul level.
Yes. And it is it is a dynamic, energetic energy. And it's like, it's going to kind of, I don't want to say like force you to take action, but it's going to present itself and give you the opportunity to take action. And it seeks action, it seeks response, it seeks movement. And as you said, though, it is really good friction, and it can be tension. It can be fucking frustrating at times, because you're like, because you might want to, like Aries and Cancer, although they are both cardinal, and there might be some interesting similarities there that you can really then unpack once you see and understand your chart a bit better. Sometimes it can just be annoying, because it's like Cancer, this planet in Cancer might want to do things differently than this planet in Aries, or they're like, why did you charge ahead, Aries? And Cancer's like, well, I wanted to feel about it, but they're both wanting to take action, and they're like, well, I took action doing this, and Aries is like, well, I took action doing it this way. So sometimes you're like, what is going on up here? But really, like, I am grateful to have like a bunch of these, and everyone is pretty much going to have at least one or more of aspects. So it's not like you can like usually get away without having any squares. And so I like the squares. What else was I going to say? I think that was it for now, actually. Yeah.
I think what's interesting, and this is probably true of everything, maybe the least the conjunction, but with any of these, we can project things out, especially so in the opposition. We'll get to that. But, this friction that we feel, it can feel inward, like it's an inner kind of battle or tension, but it can also come out, and it can be both at once. But it might also be that kind of person that's always, or the boss, or that always seems to be coming at you out of at cross purposes. So it can come from outside. It can be an inward feeling, and or both. So just something to think about, because again, it always is all operating on and within us. So whatever plays outside of us is part of us in a sense.
Sorry to interrupt. I got
No,
excited.
no,
I got
please.
excited. We're
I
in a
love it.
square. We're in a square modality now. As I'm so glad you brought that, because yes, it's in here, it's out there, it's both. And this is where we really see the psychological like part and piece of the aspects. And this is also where the houses are going to give input too, because that maybe Sun square Jupiter,
Yeah.
you see that it's in this one part of your life and it's interacting with this part of your life in your work and career. And you're like, oh, there's this weird like friction tension. But if I'm putting energy into it, like I can get some shit done. Like there are some stressors, there's some challenges. Okay. Okay. But I can work with this. It's like, yeah, you're gonna give it something, then we can make something work here.
I love that you brought up the houses. Yes, that's a
Yeah.
great way to ground it and feel in a very because the houses bring it down to earth, right? So,
Yeah.
if you have the seventh and 10th house square each other, right? And
Mhm.
so if you have planets in those houses, there could be some tension between relationship and work. And are you
Yeah.
spending, why every time you're in a relationship, maybe you're feeling that tension of like, but I need to be putting more effort into my career. Or like, how do
Yeah.
you marry the two?
Yeah.
So the houses are a great way when you go back and look at your own chart to kind of and you can feel it, but like to have it validated through the astrology.
Exactly. Exactly. Ah, love it. Well,
So
shall we move to the trine?
the trine,
Let's
the
do the trine.
trine. Okay, so now we're moving. The trine is 120 degrees, give or take, right? And this is considered, of all of the aspects, the one that is most experienced as easeful. Like it's a
Right.
flow. It's like a faucet. These planets, when you have it in your chart, they can feel really good working together. Now, maybe everybody else, like let's say it's like Mars and Pluto doing so, let's say shadow stuff, and it's flowing really well and you're enjoying it, but maybe not everybody else is. So again, let's not take it too like literally good or bad.
Yeah.
But in general, the experience of a trine can be a flow of energy that's unimpeded between these two planets. And it's almost like you've gone past the square and now it's like you're kind of going, it's like you've done the pedaling. I know Tony always uses like the
Yeah.
analogy of biking and like the trine. Let's say you're in a race and you are going down a hill, like
Yeah.
it can just be easeful, but you can really, if the more effort you put into it, like it can be hard to, like sometimes we don't put effort into our trines, but we can really capitalize on our trines if we do, because they're areas where we're often very talented or
Hmm.
skilled in something, and we might take it for granted because it's
Yeah.
second nature, unlike the sextile. So it's like just something like, people
Absolutely.
might come up to like, oh my God, how do you do that? Like, I don't know. Like,
I don't know.
it just is, right?
Yeah.
And so if we think of it in the context of relationships, it can be those people that we meet and there's like, oh my gosh, it's so easy. Like a friendship that just
Mhm.
flows and it's easy and it just, there's that kind of energy as an
Exactly.
introduction to the time.
Yeah, because these are the same elements. So they, at least here, they get each other. Like this is like earth and earth. Like, yeah, I get the familiar basis. Like, yeah, and I love what you said. It's just a friendship that really like kind of just came to be. It can be fairly harmonious, and it is something you can take for granted because we all have innate resources and talents that we just have. Everyone has that. And you're like, God, as you said, like that is so easy for you, or like how does that flow for you? And you're like, oh, it just kind of is. Like it could be something we don't even realize is harder for other people. So it's really good to become aware of these lovely trines in our chart, and how could you momentimize them even more? How can you maximize them even more? And how can then you avoid becoming this can happen with trines, becoming a little bit complacent, becoming a
Yes.
little coasting along, right? Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
Yes, exactly. And then if we think of, let's say I always love thinking about it in kind of like holistic way. If you have like these
Yeah.
squares that are giving you a lot of trouble and stressing you out, right? Well, maybe you lean into some of that trine energy to help
Yeah.
support the square. But what could also happen is you lean into the trine to escape the square. So it's kind of like how
Mhm.
conscious, always it goes back to how consciously are we working with these energies. But
Yeah.
the trine can be a really beautiful place to lean into to help us work with some of the other stressors in our chart and to give us kind of a little bit like, okay, we have these. How can we tap into them to help us with these other parts of our nature that are more challenging?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Oh, beautiful.
Little overview there,
A little overview there. And that takes us to the opposition. No.
Yes. Or
Yes.
should we do the quincunx
Quincunx.
first? The
Yes. I'm
opposite.
so sorry,
No,
quincunx.
no, you're absolutely, as far as major aspects go, the
Sure.
opposition would be next. This one that we're going to talk about in the
Ah,
order of things comes next, but it was one
yeah,
that
yeah.
was not used in traditional astrology, and it's 150 degrees away. It's called the quincunx.
Ah,
And the reason it was not considered a major aspect is because the signs share neither element nor modality nor polarity, meaning, if one's cardinal, the other is, they're not sharing anything, right? So it's like,
yeah.
there's almost like a blind spot. So they don't see each other. And so the idea in the theory of traditional astrology is like, well, we're not even feeling that kind of tension. They're not, but yet with a quincunx, there is a subtle kind of God, I love this is another thing I remember hearing Rick Levine say. It's like a
Mhm.
mosquito, right? It's like it's there, you
Oh,
can't see it, but it's there, you can't quite grab it. It's like, and you're sleeping and you're like, zzz, and you hear it, but it's kind of you can't really get to it. And so it's
yeah.
almost like you have to become aware of these energetics in your chart and make adjustments through awareness because it's not felt in the same way as like the
Yeah.
dynamism of a square, for example. That's
Exactly. Ooh, I have not heard that before. I'm definitely going to use that.
I loved when I heard that. I'm like,
No.
oh, Levine. Okay,
Yeah,
so
the
right.
living. No, but like those metaphors really, those visuals can really help because it is. And what's fascinating, I like you and I know, very like fascinated by quincunxes because this is why I love astrology. A lot of people are like, oh, they share nothing in common in a quincunx, right? They don't share an element, they don't share modality, polarity. So there's a lot of like, I don't really get you, but
Yeah.
they do sometimes share a ruler, a planetary ruler, right?
Yes, excellent point. Like
Mm-hmm.
Mars, right? We've got Aries and
Yes.
Scorpio, quincunx. Venus, Libra and Taurus, quincunx. But yet they've got the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, such a great point.
It's very interesting. Yeah, because it's like the quincunx are there are a lot of these barriers to connection and understanding. You may just not get one another, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be like evil.
Siblings that are totally different but have the same share
Oh
the same
yeah,
area.
that's such a good point because yeah, because it's like the same ruler. Because I've
Yeah.
always found that fascinating. I'm like, well, there is something there,
Yes.
right? There's a planetary connection, and like the quincunxes, that yeah, they can kind of be a pain in your ass at times because it's like adjustments, making choices, redirection, and it can be kind of validating when you're like, why is this part of my life
Right.
frustrating? And then you're like, oh, this is helpful to see why I might be facing some just like, I don't understand this, in my
Yeah.
life. Yeah.
And I think it's like it's interesting they in traditional astrology talked about like it's a blind spot, right? And so I think
Yeah.
we are often blindsided with these aspects of our nature. Like all of a sudden you're doing this and you're like, boom, this like where did this
Yeah.
come from? I did not see this coming. And over time you're like, okay, I understand this is kind of the dynamic that every time I'm doing this thing all of a sudden, so you
Yeah.
can kind of gain awareness. But I think it's also one of those aspects that people tend to, one way people work with is compartmentalizing. Like, a lot of times you're trying to integrate, where at least in modern psychological astrology, the idea is like, how can we integrate these parts of our nature? And I
Yeah.
think that quincunx is one that can be really difficult. Maybe, and not everybody, and maybe it's not always about integrating. Maybe it's more like about
Yeah.
accepting and it's okay to compartmentalize sometimes, right? It might be very difficult and might not even be the purpose to integrate these parts of our nature, but to become aware so
Yeah.
that we can better work with them in constructive ways.
Exactly. Exactly. Oh, that's a beautiful treatment of it.
Roundabout way to get there, but yeah.
Okay. Well, that takes us to the last one that we'll talk about is the
Yes.
opposition.
Yes, yes. Now we're talking about planets that are about 180 degrees from each other. So opposite each other, right?
Yeah.
And like we kind of like they share, for example, Aries and Libra are
Hmm.
oppositional signs and they are both cardinal signs. So they share that. And they're also, we have air and fire, so they're compatible by element, but yet there is still that kind of that tension, like you're
Oh
on a
yeah.
seesaw, right? So they're like two sides of the same coin,
Hmm.
but there's, we hear opposites attract and all those kinds of things. There's definitely a way to work with these two parts, but they seemingly are very different, you
Yeah.
know. And so I kind of think of Libra, how they can hold the paradox, and their Libra is really kind of, if we think about the order of the signs, is that oppositional point in the zodiac, right? So there's this sense of, if we have oppositions in our chart, we can have these parts of our nature that feel like they're kind of moving in different directions. And sometimes, before we have gotten to really understand, we tend to own one more than the other when we're younger. So we often project one planet out, and it's played out by people in our life. We draw in often people in many of our, oftentimes in relationships, we draw in that oppositional planet kind of because we're intrigued by it. It's part of us, but it's also maybe we've disowned it or we're not fully embracing it, right? And the idea with oppositions ideally is to kind of find a way to bring them both into our psyche. And that doesn't mean it has to be perfectly integrated, but maybe we kind of flow between them back and forth, find ways to work with them. It's just a little starting point.
Exactly. I know oppositions are fascinating because a lot of the time you see them played externally, but it's also what is going on internally. And so, for example, if you have I don't know, Jupiter and Leo opposite Saturn and Aquarius, it's interesting to see who, are you the Saturn? Is somebody else the Saturn? When are you being more Jupiter? Is there a way that you're kind of can merge both? And different times in your life, are you playing these different kind of planetary energies? And it's very seesaw. It's a very push-pull dynamic because, as you said, two sides of the same coin. The polarities need one another. They do. And it's a beautiful little friction and tension because they really are kind of the same, but not the same, not, And it is it's all that opposition stuff that is just kind of fascinating. I'm obsessed with the show Severance. Oh, don't get me started. But
oh my gosh, I love that show. I love Severance.
I didn't know you loved it. Oh my god! All my friends get annoyed at me.
Talking about this, such an exceptional show. Yes.
Yeah, so I am obsessed with it. So
yes,
okay, maybe we'll have to do an episode on that.
Okay, after we're going to talk about Severance. Okay,
Severance.
I know.
Oh my god, I love it so much. Oh, it's so good.
So
and just
good.
If you know that show at all, I won't go into the whole thing, but for some reason it took me there because it's literally two aspects, pun intended, of your personality split a little bit, And obviously, I'm not saying we all have oppositions. You and I have them. Everyone does. It's all, but the Jekyll and Hyde stuff, that's an interesting way to get into it,
Yes.
It just kind of, it's interesting to see stories. I'm kind of going on a weird little tangent now. Stories in relation to aspects. I think there are a lot of stories that are very opposition aspect flavored, if you get my gist.
Anyways. I think of Beauty and the Beast, and I don't know, it made me think because I don't know if that's at all a good one, but it just made me think of it. And then he's actually beautiful,
beautiful,
but it had to be brought out through that relationship.
I like the Beast too, though.
Probably not the best, but
I mean, I like.
Well, I was just thinking this idea of how we project it out until we own it. And, sometimes people say, well, then sometimes if we we attract certain people in our life, and then when we own it back, we might not continue to attract it. But that's not always the case. I was just thinking, I have the sun in Libra and the moon in Aries. And, for a long time, and my husband has the sun in Aries, so they're conjoined.
Oh, yeah.
And I would project my Aries onto him. He's the assertive one. He's the confident one. And, he's the one that's more, rah, 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 and I'm Libra, right? Well, come on now. But over time, it's seeing myself through the relationship. I could own back that Aries part of me. And instead of always projecting it onto him, I'm seeing how it's illuminating what resides within me. And that's actually made the relationship stronger, because it was easy to when you're the one who's saying this, or and it's really just a projection of a part of my own nature that was easier for me to accept the Libra part, right? And now I'm no, I kind of have learned to own that Aries moon back in me that's very alive and present. But in any case,
I'm so glad you brought that up, because oppositions, we learn a lot about them through relationships. Relationships will bring oppositional stuff to the surface. And like,
Yes.
that's such a great example of like you and your husband. And like, yeah, like, I'm not going to own this yet. And then you're like, oh, wait, it's actually always been a me. And just to like go back to Beauty and the Beast, absolutely. Like, I'm like, Belle is like, they, they're kind of like opposites of each other because she's got these very badass beastly qualities, and he's got these very sensitive, nurturing. I was like,
yes,
back.
in the real, yes, right. What they're exactly what the projections are one way, but what they actually are, their essence is it's different, right? So stories can tell us a lot.
We got very excited. Maybe it's the Libra, and we're like, ooh, polarity.
I know, we're polarities. We're so excited, right? And it's fun. It's really interesting. Sometimes they say also with the opposition that we can be really attracted, and then, as we start to, maybe it's starting to trigger that part within us, and sometimes we hear we don't love in others, but we don't love in ourselves. So what might first attract us might also repel us, and so there's that dynamic because all of a sudden we're starting to, it's kicking up stuff within ourselves that we may not like, and so it's easier that person or it's that relationship versus going, oh, it's a mirror back to me. So that's something else too to think about.
That's
so much that you can go into this, right? There's so much to go into.
So much. Awesome. Okay. So our audience, Simona and I actually paused the recording really quickly because we were so excited about this episode, and we've decided we're actually going to make this a two-parter. So we're going to conclude this episode, and where we just gave you kind of the overview of the aspects, and then we're going to come back with another episode.
Yes. At the beginning, we mentioned we are going to kind of play with these like Moon, Saturn, and Sun, Jupiter to kind of see how those would feel in aspect to each other, since also those archetypes are very different planetary archetypes. So we're going to split this up just to give you guys a pause to just kind of sit with what we kind of the journey we move through with these aspects. And then we're going to dive into those aspects more in depth with these planets. So thank you all for joining us today. And this was a lot of fun, Kaia. I can't wait to continue our conversation.
Me too. And there are going to be so many aspects to explore. So I'm really excited to dig into these next ones. So check your chart. See if you have any connections between your Sun and Jupiter, your Moon and Saturn, because we are ready to chat with you about them in the next episode.
Yes, definitely. Looking forward to the next time.
Yes. Cheers. Stay cosmic.
Stay cosmic. Bye for now.